Welcome to Swing State. I'm Fox 8 senior political reporter Bob Buckley, and tonight we have one of the two major party candidates for the top job in the state Democratic gubernatorial nominee, Josh Stein, whose name you probably know as the current Attorney General. Thanks for coming in. This is our first time doing this face-to-face. We've done it over the magic of Zoom before during the COVID and all that type of stuff. But you're a local guy, grew up in Chapel Hill, and I understand you're a state soccer champ.
We were, yes.
What position did you play?
I was a sweeper back. I was the last defensive player.
Oh, I still play, and that's why I bring this up, because I may need you on my squad.
Fair enough.
You ready to play for the state championships here in December?
I'd like it.
All right,
we beat Greensboro Page in the championship, so I hope the people in the triad don't hold it against me.
Okay, because Page is a leviathan when it comes to soccer. So
and they were back then too.
I'll bet. So you're 57, so you can play in the over 55 team.
Yep.
We're just getting all that out. It's all public record, so we're not giving away any secrets here. But you left college, or left the state rather, to go to college, to go to Dartmouth.
Yeah.
No UNC or anything like that. What was the dynamic of your life back then?
Well, I grew up first in Charlotte and then in Chapel Hill, and we came to North Carolina so that my father, Adam, could join Julius Chambers and James Ferguson in Charlotte in the mid-'60s to form North Carolina's first integrated law firm. And
Julius Chambers, a major name in civil rights history.
One of the leading civil rights lawyers of the 20th century. And they won huge cases, path-breaking cases that helped our nation tackle discrimination and lift up equality. And they did incredible things. And so I'm incredibly proud of him. But that's what brought us here. And I was just honored to be able to get into Dartmouth, and I was happy to go.
And I got to think that growing up around that had to shape who you are and your thoughts politically.
There's no question. I mean, those people who are younger than we don't necessarily remember how kind of tumultuous the 60s were and the 70s. Those were really tough times here in North Carolina. And my dad and my mom, they were strong because they believed at their core in equality. They believed in their core that everyone should have an opportunity. They believed in their core justice. And that's how they raised my brother, sister, and me. And I'm blessed to be their child.
I remember watching live the riots in Grant Park in my hometown of Chicago growing up, and it was you couldn't quite believe what you saw. And then the mayor goes on the air and says, "We're here, not here to shoot." He said, "You can shoot looters on sight." That was the order from Mayor Daley back in the day.
And my dad's law firm building was firebombed and burned in 1971.
All right, but at age 32, you ran John Edwards' Senate campaign, won a big upset against the incumbent Locke Faircloth. What was sort of the thought behind that campaign? I think you wanted to paint John Edwards as young and vibrant, and Locke Faircloth as maybe older and out of touch. What was behind all that?
First of all, it's hard to remember 25 years ago.
It was a while ago.
But John was young. He was young. He was a very talented, powerful advocate. He fought hard for his clients, and he fought hard for the people of North Carolina, and he gave up, unfortunately, his Senate term after one term. By that point, I had long since returned to North Carolina. I came back in 2000, so after 2 years up in Washington working with him, I came back and was hired by Roy Cooper, who had just been elected as Attorney General, and I headed his Consumer Protection Division.
Well, I'm not saying they're connected, but it was about what time you left that John Edwards already had said, I need to move on to try to run for president. He told me in an interview that it was because he felt he couldn't get enough done in the Senate. But when the Edwards stuff blew up later, and the whole controversy with the stuff that happened with him and the child out of wedlock, I mean, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't ask, did that take you by surprise? How did you?
100%. I mean, it was shocking. I wasn't involved in the campaign at all. I was fully living here in Raleigh and working, doing consumer protection work. But as a North Carolinian, as an American, it was shocking and very, very upsetting. All
right, well, let's get on to the issues and your stances on them. I think one of the biggest issues, what most Democrats are going to make front and center, is the abortion rights issue. It's going to be probably another good issue for Democrats this year, don't you think?
Well, it's a bad issue for people, which may make it a good issue politically.
Right.
It'll remain to be seen. But we are in a tough place because of what Republicans are doing here in North Carolina in the General Assembly and across the Southeast. We are the southernmost state where abortion remains legal at all. And it remains legal, but hanging on by a thread in North Carolina. As you may remember, last summer, the Republican supermajority in the General Assembly overrode Governor Cooper's veto and dramatically restricted abortion, cutting it to a 12-week ban.
Because the 20-week ban was instituted after Roe.
Yes, actually it was already in state law, so it was sort of.
But it had been put on hold.
Revived.
Right,
exactly.
Came back to life.
It revived. So It's now 12 weeks, and why it's so critical is because my opponent, the Lieutenant Governor, Mark Robinson, has made very clear he wants to ban abortion with no exceptions.
He talks about incrementally getting there, but let's talk about your position. Lay out your position. You want abortion law to read how?
I want it to be with the Roe versus Wade framework, which is exactly what the law had been before the Supreme Court.
So what restrictions does that allow?
It allows restrictions post viability unless it's the life or the health of the mother at stake.
Do we define viability? Because I know that moves. We have some numbers to look at on this polling on abortion, and there's some from Gallup, and it's interesting how they flip. You go from 70% saying yes, it should be available in the first trimester, then down to it flips by the third trimester, where 70% say it shouldn't be available at all. In the middle, they have. Is that where we're going to end up?
Well, I don't know where we're going to end up, but what I know is that if the Republican legislature wants to go from 12 weeks to 6 weeks to 0 weeks, which is exactly what Robinson has said, I will veto that legislation to further restrict.
But could you come to an agreement with any of these? For example, women in general, it almost split on whether it should be legal or not legal in certain circumstances. Women are slightly more pro-choice than men. The Kaiser Family Foundation has numbers too, where again it's sort of down the thirds. What type of agreement could you come to with a Republican legislature?
I mean, what this says is that women, 95% of women want it to be, 85% of women want it to be legal under any circumstances or certain circumstances. And what I want to do is I will veto any legislation that further restricts women's reproductive freedoms in North Carolina. Right now, we are the southernmost state in which abortion remains legal at all.
Could you accept something that restrictions either beyond 20 weeks or the last trimester?
It's not plausible to me that the Republicans would pass a law that would say we're going to increase women's freedom up to 20 weeks. If they did, I would sign the law that returned us to back to where we were.
You'd be willing to compromise is the point I'm trying to get to. Is there a compromise that, I'm not asking you to specifically what it would be, but just are you open to making sure we get something compromised?
I want women to be able to make this decision for themselves. What I do not want is a bunch of politicians, almost all of whom are men, not all, but most, making decisions for women. They are elbowing their way into the doctor's office and telling the doctor what he or she can say to the woman, and then telling the woman what she has to do, and that is wrong.
All right, a lot more to cover here tonight, including the dilemma an attorney general can be in when he believes a law isn't constitutional, plus one of the biggest issues any governor has to deal with, education. Those are coming up. Welcome back to Swing State. We're talking with Josh Stein, North Carolina's Attorney General and Democratic Party nominee for governor this year. But I want to go back to some economic issues and then some of your jobs as Attorney General. On economic development, you have what I believe you're calling, and correct me if this is right, the Working Families Tax Cut.
That's right.
All right, this really appears to be a revival of the Earned Income Tax Credit, which was a Republican idea that got put into the state level here from 2007 to 14.
That's right.
So, you know, sometimes this is a rhetorical sleight of hand. A lot of cases, these are people who haven't paid taxes, but we're going to give them some money to make it worth their while to work. Is that the essence?
These are people who are already working.
Right.
They're earning income.
Right.
And what we want to do is put more money in their pockets because folks are struggling right now. Right now, it is hard. Folks are struggling with rent, with medicine, with food, with gas. And what I want to do is build the economy from the bottom up and middle out. Not giving tax cuts to rich people, but rather helping folks who need more money. So the great thing about this tax cut plan is it puts more money in the pockets of working folks, $500 on average, $1,500 about for a family with 3 kids, and it lifts kids out of poverty and stimulates local economies.
I just want to make sure we're being correct on the definition of words, though. We call it a tax cut for those people, but again, in most cases, they aren't paying this tax. They're just getting money back they hadn't paid. But again, the idea is this encourages people to continue to work because it says, if I work, I will get this bonus. But I just want to make sure we're agreeing on the verbiage here. It's really not a tax cut for most of these people because they're not paying tax in the beginning.
Well, when you look at the whole tax code, it's very complicated. There are lots of credits and there are lots of deductions. This is a tax credit, but it will put more money into the pockets of working people. And honestly, They're the ones who need it, not the rich people.
All right, there are a couple of laws that you said that you would choose not to defend, primarily abortion law, if Roe v. Wade is again codified to federal law by President Biden, if he's reelected. If we get a Republican Attorney General and we have Roe codified again, you would want them to defend that law, wouldn't you?
Yes, and I defend laws, all laws, if they're constitutional, whether I agree with them or not. The problem is the legislature passed a law that was unconstitutional, as the court has found in its preliminary injunction, and as the legislature itself conceded, because they immediately went back and passed a new law fixing some of those infirmities.
Here's the challenge. Yeah, I get what you're saying. Here's the challenge with some of this. Are you familiar with Greg Zoller, had been the Attorney General in Indiana?
Yeah, I know Greg.
Before you. And so you may have seen this quote that we're going to put up on the screen for you too. And there it is. He says that the courts are the ones who are empowered with determining whether a law is constitutional. To bring that question to the courts, there has to be a lawyer on each side. So I guess the point here is, you decided you didn't want to defend that law. Am I wrong on that?
No, you're correct.
Okay.
Because my oath is to the Constitution of the United States and to the people of this state. It is not to the legislature.
But Zoller is saying you have to be there to defend it.
He's saying there needs to be a lawyer on two sides.
Right.
And so what I said to the legislature was, you can defend this law, and I will consent to your intervention. If you want to come in and defend it, you can, but my oath will not allow me to do so because it was unconstitutional.
But again, who determines whether it's unconstitutional? You're saying you're determining it as Attorney General, but the courts are supposed to do that.
But if the courts have told us...
Okay, you're saying there's precedent to say it is. The voting ID law, how do you...
I'm defending it right now.
Yeah.
Because the U.S. Supreme Court has ruled that voter ID laws are constitutional if they're done in the correct way. And so my office is defending that law along with the General Assembly, which is also defending the law.
Yeah, and
so that's a good example where
of one you may not agree with.
I do my job.
Yeah.
I do my job, and my job is the Constitution and the people. It is not the legislature.
Let me get on one more issue as Attorney General.
Okay.
What about the cases, for example, with the fix to the absentee ballots? We know there was a Republican who got elected with some nefarious work with absentee ballots.
That's right.
And that law, that election was nullified, and he chose not to rerun in the new election. Mark Elias, an attorney who works essentially with the Democrats and Democratic Party, came in and sued, and then you settled with him on the suit. I think there was a complaint that changed the law without the General Assembly's consent.
Well, that case had a number of provisions in the lawsuit where they were saying different parts of North Carolina law were suspect in light of COVID and the state of emergency that presented. And the court itself, the federal court, had actually forced us to concede on one of the early points. And there were a whole bunch of issues that were being determined, and what we did was bring resolution to all of those cases. We do that all the time. And in that case, just remember what it was like. People were terrified. And so now they could go vote, they could hand off their ballot hands-free. That was one of the provisions, was rather than hand it to the person, they could put it on the table in front of the person, and the person could take it.
But there were other ones too that people felt was a change of the law that only the General Assembly is legally, constitutionally allowed to do.
The courts modify the law all the time. When the law is unconstitutional, the courts will modify it all the time.
But this was not a court. This was I thought it was a settlement between you and Elias.
It was an agreement that the court then ratified.
All right, I want to get some education too, if we can. More studies show that there are some behavioral benefits that seem to stem from early childhood education, but all the studies show that they all pretty much disappear by second grade.
I disagree with that.
That's
your analysis of the studies. Plenty of studies show that if you have high quality early childhood pre-K, they can have duration well into elementary school.
The Abecedarian is one of the rare ones in North Carolina, but again, it's got to be Cadillac, very small, very expensive programs that aren't scalable. That's the point. And that the advocates of this keep pointing to these Cadillac programs and saying, look what we can have, but we don't have the money or the personnel for those.
We don't have the will.
Yeah.
Right now, there are high quality early childhood providers across North Carolina. A lot of them are struggling because it's expensive to provide this care. And the state has not lived up to its, frankly, obligation, its duty to the young people of North Carolina. There's a constitutional provision that says that the state will provide a sound basic education to all young people, and they are not living up to that. And
Yeah,
that's from the North Carolina Supreme Court.
There is an argument over that, and we all know that the Leandro case has been going through the courts for 30 years, close
Yes,
to.
that's right.
Over this, and there's still some disagreement on how all that may happen.
And I'm defending having strong public schools.
And I'm not saying. Are you saying? Well,
Yeah.
we can't get in it because we're actually limited on time here.
Okay.
But we can get into this next block. There's still more to come tonight, including immigration and what the presidential race looks like here in North Carolina when we get back. We're back with North Carolina Attorney General Josh Stein, who is running for governor this year as the Democratic nominee. We were talking before the break about education, and there can be disagreements over whether a certain funding level needed or not.
Yeah.
Are you?
I agree with you.
Some people in your party feel like the Republicans are out to destroy public education. There might be one or two. Do you really think as a party they're trying to get rid of public education?
I don't know. Certainly there are plenty of Republicans who deeply value public education because their kids also go to public schools.
Mine did.
I went to public schools.
Yeah.
My wife did. Our 3 children all went to North Carolina public schools. And 85% of all kids do. So clearly tons of Republicans, tons of unaffiliated, tons of Democratic kids or kids of parents are in these public schools. But when you look at the leadership, they are hollowing out our public schools. They have dropped North Carolina to 49th in the country, 49th out of 50 in terms of funding effort. That's a disgrace.
Measured how? Per capita spending?
Measured by the amount of investment as a share of our state's economy.
Okay.
We are 46th in starting teacher pay. We are lower than every neighboring state. It should be no surprise that we start the school year every year with thousands of uncertified teachers in the classroom.
Which aren't necessarily bad teachers.
We have got to do better. We have got to do better.
Our turnover rate, though, is about 12%. Its attrition rate is 12% in North Carolina for teachers. That's below the national average, according to the Department of Public Instruction, and lower than the total government attrition.
And that attrition rate increased by 50% from last year, 2 years ago to last year.
Now, the Republicans love to tout the increases they put into education, and they've focused most of their increases in salary on the early years of teaching because they say that's where they were losing most of them. But when you actually adjust for inflation, they have beaten inflation, but barely. So it's not been a 12% increase after inflation adjustment. It's been about a 1. But how much more can we put into education? Because it is the #1 spending item in our budget.
Yeah, we absolutely can invest more. And in fact, part of, we mentioned in the last segment, the Leandro settlement.
Right.
There was a provision, a settlement that the courts approved that would have put in hundreds of millions of dollars more in teacher pay. We could be paying our teachers substantially more. It's just the Republicans in the General Assembly choose not to. And Mark Robinson, my opponent in this race, he called teachers wicked people, and he urged parents to take their kids away from them and put them anywhere other than public schools.
When we talk about one of the problems with with the challenge you've got here is you're saying to people who are making less than they did 5 years ago because of inflation, who have gotten 1% a year increase maybe, and say, hey, I want you to pay more taxes for these people who have beaten inflation to get even more. So it's a little bit of a tough sell to the person who's like, look, I'm already drowning. I don't need more taxes.
I think every parent in this state wants to have the best teachers possible in their kids' classroom. And I think they really value the teachers that they have in the main. But they talk to the teachers. They know how the teachers are struggling. They know that teachers are having to work a second job just in order to stay in the classroom.
And they're often working second jobs to be able to pay all their bills, including their taxes, but you're asking them to pay more in some cases then.
I'm not. I'm asking for wealthy folks to, right now, first of all, we don't need to raise anybody's taxes in order to pay teachers more. The Republicans simply are choosing not to pay teachers more. They're doing things like the voucher scheme, which is taking hundreds of millions of dollars in the coming years out of the state budget.
In addition to the budget.
Can I finish my point?
They say it's in addition to the budget, but go ahead.
They're taking it out of the budget that they say they no longer have money to use to pay teachers. We could pay a dramatic teacher pay increase if we were not subsidizing wealthy people who are sending their children to unaccountable private school. And I think a parent should choose whatever school is best for their child, but the taxpayer, the public, should not be paying wealthy people to send their kids to private schools.
The poorer families are the biggest supporters of the voucher system. They love it. Should we not have a voucher system that maybe is means tested for the poorer families to escape?
There was one, and then they've completely blown it open.
Would you be open to one, though?
If they got rid of I would absolutely support a law that went back to where it was before, where you had to have it means tested,
Okay.
and it had to be for somebody who was in public school, not the child of a wealthy person whose kids never even touched a public school ground.
All right, let's hit one other education issue because it seems to be kind of a hot button these days before we might move on if we have any time left. And that is, it's been a sort of contentious issue about whether, for lack of a better term, biological males should be able to compete in women's sports, trans women. Would you be open to a law that said either they must be allowed to play or a law that says they shouldn't be allowed to compete with girls?
Yeah, well, first of all, every person is a child of God, and I believe that. What upsets me is when people like Mark Robinson, my opponent, says that LGBTQ kids are filth. He says they're worse than maggots. We need to be focusing on the issues that people are talking about. When I was just in Taylorsville yesterday, 2 days ago, meeting with the superintendent, administrators, students. What they were talking about was having more teachers who were well paid in their classrooms.
But this is still an issue you may come up against. What should the people know about how you would handle an issue of whether biological male/trans female should be able to compete with girls? Is that an issue you've thought about?
I want to focus on what's going to affect the 1.4 million students in our public schools.
It could affect
making them
half of
the
them.
strongest they possibly can be by having very well paid teachers, having more social workers, more school nurses, more school counselors, folks who support educators, help kids deal with the issues that they're dealing with today, and then move the state forward in the best way possible, because education is what gives everybody a shot, opportunity to live a better life, and that's what we want for all North Carolinians.
Polls seem to be getting better for President Trump, or President Biden rather. Do you see President Biden winning re-election and winning North Carolina? I can't imagine you sit here and tell me no, but they seem to be trending in his direction.
Well, he has been laser focused on restarting the economy. We're seeing all kinds of manufacturing come back to the United States. In North Carolina, we have Wolfspeed, not far from here, going to be starting operations. The EV
Toyota battery plant right here.
It's all great news. But of course, I'm running to be the governor of North Carolina, which is a different job, and I have to apply to the voters and ask for them to support me in this effort. And I'm making my case that I have, as Attorney General, been fighting for people and delivering, whereas my opponent fights these job-killing culture wars.
All right, that is it for tonight. For the record, we have offered the same opportunity to the Republican nominee, Mark Robinson, but he has yet to agree to join us. We'll have more important and interesting guests each week, though, regardless. Hope to see you back here next Sunday.